Hello and welcome back to MLQ Replay. I'm Ethan Sturm along with Naresh Adala. We're excited to talk about week 2 of the MLQ season. A 2-series week, but an exciting one nonetheless. No Ben Mertens here with us this week, but he should be joining next week. Naresh, how you doing today?
I'm good. Happy to be back.
Yeah, awesome. So, 2 series that, I think kind of did and didn't go the ways that we were expecting, and we're going to talk all about them. In the East Division, Boston took on Charlotte, and a lot of talk about whether this is, I feel like a tale as old as time. Was this going to be the year that Charlotte kind of took that step that kind of started to surpass? Once again, Boston very much said, no, that's not how it works in this particular matchup, and came away with the sweep. And then out in the North Division, Minneapolis kind of got its revenge on Detroit and got a 3-0 sweep as well. Let's start in the East Division. Let's start with this Boston-Charlotte series. Naresh, when we were talking in the lead-up, we thought it might be a close series, might be a little bit more of a coin-flippy series. That was not the result in the end. What do you think was the difference maker that kind of took us from what our expectations might have been to what the results were?
Well, I'm going to take a page out of the commentary box on Saturday. Boston rode on Haviland Highway the entire 3 games, and that was the difference. It was unbelievable to see Max and Lulu go out there and completely still dominate in the good year of 2025. It's ridiculous. The fact that they are able to do it year in and year out is remarkable, but it's also a testament to how just great they are as players. But I think obviously going beyond just the Max and Lulu aspect of it, it's the fundamentals that I think Boston played with is what the difference at the end of the day was. There were a lot of things where I'd be messaging the chat or I'd be messaging people. I'd be like, hey, this looked really good. And then Charlotte wouldn't finish because they missed a pass or they couldn't complete the pass, or just really bad turnovers where they would be throwing just crazy high lollipop passes over the tall hoop. And it's like, guys, we're in 2025. We cannot be making these passes anymore. Like, they're just sitting there waiting to snipe these receivers out of the play. And there were many times that I thought Charlotte just ran themselves off the field just because of poor fundamentals. And I think this is where we go back into just the basics of the sport. We don't need complex strategies in this sport to be competitive. We just need to see people catch and throw. And if you can do that well, you can compete at a high level, and then you can start incorporating some of the higher level strategies that Charlotte did show. Like, Charlotte had an idea of what they wanted to do. When they were able to run it, it looked great. But more often than not, they were not able to do it. And that was the difference in games 1 and 3 versus a game 2, where they looked a bit more put together in game 2. Games 1 and 3, it just felt very disjointed.
Yeah, I mean, we can go game by game in a second. I did want to kind of touch on your macro ideas first. But yeah, I mean, I do think Charlotte showed, sparks. I mean, there were moments of just absolute greatness from, in my Mount of War. There were moments of absolute greatness from Thompson. But I agree, play to play. We didn't always see that. But again, it's always hard to play uphill against, a lot of dodgeball disadvantages. And that kind of goes back to what you were saying. And, obviously, Max Haviland and Lushu are who they are. And the stats speak for themselves. Lushu was named Player of the Week earlier tonight. But this is a different Boston team, right? Even when the entire time that this team's existed, in the early days, yes, Max and Lou were there, but so were Mario Nasta and Leanne Doman. And, then Mario, retired, and, Kieran Collier, now the head coach of the team, took those steps. And there was Kieran and Leanne alongside with Max and Lou. The rest of this beater core is very young right now, with the exception of Aaron McCready, who's also a veteran player. And I think the coaching staff did interesting things. We saw a lot of the not necessarily overlapping minutes between Haviland and Shu, which allowed them to dominate the game for more of the minutes than if they were doing that together. And, maybe we'll get to talk to Kieran about, what they were thinking in terms of those moves. But like you said, this has been a matchup that they've always seemed to get the better of Charlotte in. I don't know if they're in the beating core of Charlotte's heads at this point, but that was definitely a big part of it. But ultimately, we knew that they were probably going to have a beater edge. But this Boston team, it can't be understated how young this quadball core is. You know, a couple veteran names like Athena Mayer, you know, and Carson Lozaba, who both played, you know, still playing at a very high level. But I mean, this is a team that was at times starting a 19-year-old, you know, freshman out of BU in games in the series. So and that could have shut them down. You know, Max and Lou and Co could have done everything that they do, and it might not have mattered. But like you said, they played a lot of good fundamentals. We saw a lot of well-designed passing offenses. I think sometimes when we got a little deeper into the depth, you know, maybe the third line struggled a little bit to produce offensively. But I mean, I think there's a lot of positives for Boston that they can take forward into the season.
I'm really glad you said what you just said, because the most important part of everything that was said by you, holy crap, that was terrible, was the fact that Boston legitimately played 3 lines deep against MLQ competition. Like everything we talk about, we talk a ton about, hey, you need to develop your players, you need to play all your people. Like we say all of this, but at the end of the day, we as the media also say, hey, you need to win. And if a team doesn't win as comfortably as we want them to, we knock them down for it. And I think that's just obviously the curse of being in the media and talking about these things. But I think that's the part where Boston third line might not have looked as comfortable as the first and second line. We also have to look at what the third line was doing. They played against MLQ level talent where they had Sammy Magner as their ball carrier for the most part, taking a lot of good space, was able, and there was one, I think it was game 1 or 2, where she just dipped her elbow, went past the point defender, shot at small hoop. And that's the type of aggression. That's the type of, I think Kieran's saying game 1. That's the type of aggression that I love in a young ball carrier in particular. And that's what opens up a lot of the offense. And I think, yes, they might not have looked as complete right now, but it's their first series of the year, right? They have multiple series to continue to grow. And the biggest thing with this Boston team is champs at the end of the day is what's going to matter. And that's what they're going to be held to the standard of. So that's what they need to build towards. And I think I love the fact that Boston has continued this trend of that we've seen the last 2 seasons where they're playing through all of their people, and they have 3 distinct lines with 3 distinct types of players. And I think that's what's going to help their player development and just continue to build the program into the future.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's why, you know, the head coaching situations they've been the last 2 years, you know, with Harry Greenhouse this year and Kieran Collier this year, are just such perfect for what this program needs right now. They both work in the college game. I mean, Collier, you know, is such a good player developer, and, you know, went through this whole process themselves, you know, put in the work for years and years and years to get where they are. And, you know, they're willing to make those building blocks. A player that we haven't talked about that was the team's leader in goals in this series was Ethan Dillon, who, you know, we mentioned Sam Magner, you know, playing as a ball handler, you know, a little bit in the depth of the lines. This team kind of needs also like a star primary ball carrier. And, you know, Dillon started to show those pieces. And that's what this team's going to need. You know, there's no Jake Archibald anymore. There's no Ian Skur anymore. Someone needs to step up. And, you know, to see Dillon, you know, perform like that is, you know, very exciting for a player who's, you know, just a year and change out of college at this point.
I agree with you. And obviously, I think this is a conversation we had off camera. I think, yes, when we think about potentially the male player, a male chaser position, we often think about these very ball dominant players that are able to run through people. And yeah, I think that's fine and all. But I think what makes a really good ball carrier in this era of the game is the ability to, take on that contact and score, but also be able to play off ball, be able to supplement your other players on your line. And I think that's what Ethan Dillon does phenomenally. I thought the best that Boston's offense looked was when Ethan was in the backside of the field, backside of the hoops, where he would just hit the lane and Athena would hit him on the cut and he would catch and score. And I think he went he had 2 possessions where he scored back-to-back goals just because of that. And then this constant ability to know the type of role you're filling with your teammates, but also being unselfish enough where you are going to make those runs. Even if the pass doesn't come, you are going to make those runs. You are going to hit that lane hard. And when you do get that opportunity, you catch and score. And I think that's the development that we've seen from Ethan a lot considering he was the star ball carrier for BU back in college, but we've really seen him also develop as an off-ball chaser, and I think that's really opened up his game and made him a more balanced player.
Yeah. And, as we look ahead with this team, one thing I do want to caution, is that I think there's certain things about Charlotte that really play into the hands of the way Haviland and Chu like to play the game. And mainly what I'm saying here is that a player like Cody Lebov is not scared to get away from hoops and just brawl with them with dodgeballs. And I think what we've kind of started to see, and, thinking about the USQ season as well, and kind of, some of those games against Warriors that they played, is that there's beaters who are just refusing to, engage with Haviland and Chu at this point, and making them figure something else out. And I think, if dodgeballs are going to be on the ground, I mean, we saw, the plays that Haviland can make, the plays that Chu can make, blind catches, etc. But, I don't think it's controversial to say they're going to be dogs going into that New York series, but that's in a couple weeks. But it's going to be, what can this team do if New York just refuses to engage? What's it going to look like? What strategies are going to be implemented? So I'm really interested to see that. I do think, there is a lot of, things to be excited with about the Charlotte team still. I think there is a lot of talent on that team. They're going to just need to figure out, a way to, put it all together, like you said, be a little bit more consistent in the way they're playing, and also just, not get, run off the field in the dodgeball game to that level.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway from Charlotte was they can clearly hang, but when they need to zig, they zag, and when they need to zag, they zig. And it's just, that's where I think goes into their disjointedness, because, I mean, you brought up Cody Lebov, and there were points where I'm like, yeah, Cody, I'm going to be frank with everyone, right? My game plan for what Charlotte, or how Charlotte could have gone into this, was Cody and Celine try to play or try to keep Max and Lulu in check, and now you try to let your more experienced beater core take on a younger Boston beaters. I thought for me, if you could do that, if you could keep it close with your seeker advantage, in theory, that's what I thought Charlotte's road to victory was going to be. And unfortunately, they didn't get that because you couldn't hang with Max and Lulu. And I think there were parts of that game, those games, where once Charlotte goes back and watches this film, you'll see Cody take on exchanges when he shouldn't have, or not take exchanges when he should have. And then there was this one play where it was Max and Lulu, they lost control. Cody, instead of I think it was like he should have ran it back, but he took the exchange, lost control, and now Celine was beat out already. And it was just what went from Charlotte got control to now they're running and y'all don't have control at all. And it's just these little moments where I'm like, guys, like, what, y'all have been playing. I think those were like the type of mistakes that when you are a bit more experienced, those are the things that, as a media personality, I don't like seeing from older players, right? Because it's the expectations, I think, that we set for these players, and because we know what they can do. And I think that's where, for me, Charlotte was just very disappointing this weekend. Specifically game one. I thought the way game one started, it didn't look like they were ready to play. Game two started, I was like, oh yeah, this is the team that I was expecting. And I really thought game three was going to be a battle. And unfortunately, it just was not. And I think that's where they need to figure out a way to just be on the same page from the jump.
Yeah. And I don't want to talk about it right at this moment. I want to get to our first guest, but Charlotte was playing, some of that, more hoop zone look, if you want to call it kind of the way the Warriors were running the zone. Obviously Ryan Davis is part of that group. But that doesn't necessarily work with, your beaters being very aggressive. I think the zone is going to be a huge part of the metagame of the season. I think we'll have plenty of time to talk about it. I'm not going to bring that up right now, but like I said, I do want to get to our first guest. So I'm going to bring in head coach of the Boston Forge, Kieran Collier. Kieran, thanks for coming on tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So,
obviously you're listening to this talk, and we've been talking about Boston kind of being in a transition period. Even last year already, some of the veterans had left the program. It was kind of that rebuilding start, who's going to come in. I feel like that as you entered the program as a head coach, obviously you've been with the program a long time. At the exact same time, like that process got accelerated with even more veterans leaving, especially on the quad ball side. So kind of talk to us about you and your coaching staff's, concepts coming into the season and how you were looking to handle that.
Yeah, well, I think that acceleration was part of the reason I wanted to coach in the first place too, was recognizing like how exciting of an opportunity it was to kind of like, help guide this transitionary period for Boston Quadball. I think, going into the season, we really just wanted to focus on keeping things simple. Making sure that everyone was coming in at different parts of their learning journey. And so making sure that learning curve was kind of smoothed a little bit for everyone as best we could. But also I think, just in general, Boston historically in the past has kind of like, tapered out in tournaments because our offense tends to dry up against certain looks or certain ways defenses play us. And I really just want like this season for us to be a bit more fluid, have a more like read focused offense where, it's our offense really depends on kind of how the defense is playing us and really just, making smart decisions, but not having right or wrong ways to approach situations, trying to get people to be comfortable with failure, lean into the mistakes as like a quintessential part of the learning process and just, kind of figure out what works and build confidence over what's, both a long and short season.
Yeah. So obviously one of those players rapidly building confidence, as we talked about, is Ethan Dillon, also part of your coaching staff, obviously becoming a bigger part of what modern Boston Quadball is. So can you speak a little to him and kind of his growth, both as a player and leader?
Yeah, I mean, well, first I had to scout against Ethan a lot when he was in college playing literally every single minute as BU's primary ball carrier. So, definitely very experienced with him as a player. It's been really great getting to work with him as a coach. He was the first person I touched base with after I found out I had the head coaching job. Just kind of knew all of the value he brought to the team last year, just as someone who does a great job leading by example and really keeps the game fun for himself, but is always in the right place. And, after a certain point, when it happens multiple times, there's a reason for it. I'm actually just so proud of how he approached this series. We've been trying to figure out a lot of so many new players, a lot of different lines, different chemistry, which pairs are having good chemistry with each other. And, Ethan, I think because of, he's so fluid in the way he plays, every line he's being placed on, he has to kind of ask himself, am I facilitating? Am I playing off ball? What is the best role for me as a player? What is the best role for me as a coach right now? How do I work on myself and figure out my place in this offense while also developing other people? And I think, he's done a great job balancing that. And I think, a lot of that hard work really paid off in games because we just kind of put him in and he immediately, I think, scored 2 or 3 goals. And it just kind of really opened everything up for us. So yeah, huge Ethan Dillon fan.
Sure. You called a very game-changing timeout in, I believe it was game 2, where things were very rocky. And then right out of that timeout, you guys probably went on a 40, 50 point run to just kind of put it away. Your offense was really kind of lackadaisical for a lot of the first half of that game. The passes weren't there like they were for a lot of the series. You also didn't have control for a bit. What was said in that timeout? How were you guys able to kind of change what was going on in that game?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is the field dimensions were a little long in game 1, and it got addressed between game 1 and 2. And I think what happened for a lot of the beginning of game 2 was all of our chasers having the beaters much closer to them than they had in game 1. And I think it was just kind of a bit of a shock to the system a bit of there was one specific player. I remember Tony was just playing a more aggressive position in a front back, and the pass just went right next to where Tony was. And so I think we just needed to kind of take a timeout and say hey, it's not that we're doing anything wrong. We're just, not paying attention to where the beaters are. So I think really we said, just slow down at the beginning of every offense. Chasers just look at where the beaters are first and then just make your moves off of that. It didn't really feel like there was too much we needed to adjust. I think a lot of our process was really solid, and it was just the execution was failing a bit because we were playing a little bit on the back foot, a little bit hesitant because of the advanced beater pressure we were dealing with. And credit to the Charlotte beaters. I have all the respect in the world for Cody and Celine. They're so fun to play against, and Tony too. And they just played really well in game 2 and held down control for long stretches of time. And I think, that look against control for, 5, 6, 7 possessions in a row also it gets frustrating to play against as a chaser or as a beater too, because you just get a little antsy. And I think sometimes we were trying to hit home runs when we needed to just, keep hitting some singles and let the play develop for us.
So, you talk about, the beater matchups and whatnot, playing the matchups. We talked a little bit earlier about, the way you guys have deployed Max and Lulu in this series. Boston historically has been like very stringent on, beater pairs. That's not how you guys really went about in this series. What was kind of the conversations to develop that? Was it your coaching staff? Were the beaters having input? And kind of how did you guys decide to go this way this series?
Yeah, well, I think, the other coaches have really empowered me to kind of take the beaters and run with them, which, I've appreciated because all of them come from chasing backgrounds. And so that means I don't have to do too much because, Max, Lulu, Tom, and Aaron are all there and all, have been or could be coaches at various teams in their own right. But I think I give Chicago a lot of credit last year. They really ran their beaters in like these short, 3-minute shifts. And, just felt like playing against them in the semis, it felt like a barrage, just like fresh legs continuing to come at you. And, even if we felt like we were making like the right decisions, a lot of times it was just like that blitzing feeling. And, I think I give myself like a B on the rotations. I think that was probably a thing I could have done better because we didn't rotate through our beaters as much as we wanted to. But yeah, I just really want everyone to be comfortable playing with everyone. We had a couple summers ago when Lulu got injured and Addie kind of just hopped in to fill her spot with Max, and we kept like that pair very static instead of moving things around. I think in general, I want us to be prepared for when things go poorly. Also, if one part of your pair isn't playing well in a game, the other beater shouldn't be punished for those things. They should, So I think, it lets us be more flexible and adjust to how teams are playing. I probably played Max and Lulu more than, my rotation board said I should. And I think it was partially because they were just doing such a good job, cooking, for lack of a better word. And I think also Aaron and Tom on that second line were so bought into what we were trying to do with those short subs that it kind of looked a little unbalanced at times. But yeah, I think just getting people comfortable playing with other people, you never know who's going to have to miss a series because of travel or life. So the more we can do it, the more ready we are for when it happens and we don't feel like we're being punched in the face because something's new and scary.
I think we can all as coaches appreciate that's a little hard to turn off the superstar player button sometimes when they're being a superstar. So, obviously, like we were saying, I think Fast Break News had you guys winning 2-1 their predictions, but kind of has a coin flip. I can tell you privately that's kind of where we were when we were talking about the series leading in. As such a young team this year, kind of what were expectations, not just for the series, but the season, kind of as a coaching staff? Like, what are you guys defining as a successful season this year?
I haven't honestly really put too much of a ceiling on it because I think we're all trying to figure out what that looks like for us. I think, the main thing has just been keeping, the short-term goals in sight and just continuing to work towards those, knowing that the long-term goals are happening in the background. Our plan going into Charlotte was really just focused around respect the other team that we're playing, respect ourselves, right? Respect the game, don't do stupid shit and good things will happen. And I think, you just do that enough and good things come from it. But I honestly forgot the initial question you asked, if I'm being so honest.
That's fine.
Kieran, obviously, congratulations on a great series, but something I wanted to talk about was who is Jade Gray and how are they out there playing like prime Serge Ibaka? That's crazy. Oh my goodness. In game one, I think it was MY came off the dribble and just went up tall hoop, tried to dunk it. Jay just went, and I was like, oh, I went crazy. I was just sitting on the couch, went crazy. But talk to me about Jay Gray. Talk to me about these younger players that might not have gotten the notoriety that they might have deserved, because we talk about Ethan, but he's been part of the Boston program for years now. So talk to me about some of these younger players, some of these players that are from out of state. How do you think you as a coaching staff have done, while also the older players, the veterans? Talk to me about that culture versus talent aspect of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm sad Emma's not here to answer this question because no one's a bigger Jade fan than Emma is. But yeah, Jade's from the Minnesota area. Has had to play a lot of different positions in their time, both on University of Minnesota and then Red Pandas as well. And I'll be honest, both them and Zach D'Onofrio, like I really didn't have on my radar going into tryouts, and I think they just both played incredibly well at tryouts. Jade is just such a defensive force at hoops, and it's one of those things where you see it at tryouts and you're like, okay, this is really great. I can't wait to stress test this against more talented players more consistently. And then Jade's first couple of practices, every single scrimmage, they're having multiple stuffs at the hoop from really talented drivers, really tenured players, and just seeing it hold not only hold up but scale to the level of talent they're playing has been awesome to see. And they've been coming into their own as a bit of a driver as well. They already have a shot. They have such length. Their stride length is so long. They can really get around people. And they also, are part of our seeker rotation too. So, just really a well-rounded player, has offered to beat if we need them to as well. And then, Zach D'Onofrio, can't say enough positive things about him as well. The two of them both, started for a reason. And, part of it is, balancing older, younger players, right? So we're not putting out just a line of old people, just a line of young people. But I think, they both earned that spot, through practices. I don't think anyone on the team had any issues with them starting because they know the work that they've been putting in. Zach reminds me a combination of Ethan Dillon and Zach Doyle a little bit with some of the on-ball, off-ball stuff, just a very intuitive cutter. Great attitude, incredibly coachable, so coachable, just always asking for more feedback, and just, always ready for the next challenge. And I want to shout out Cleo as well, Cleo Brooks, who got her first MLQ minutes as well. I know she played the Aftershock team in the West last summer, but she's been doing really great. And Monday practice, already was hey, here are the things I noticed about my game on film that I want to improve. I want to hear your thoughts too. So I think the benefit of having a lot of, talented young players on your team is that they all are really willing to put in the work, and they have the energy to do so and the energy to challenge each other. And it's meant that some of the older players on the team, can't stay complacent. They really have to kind of, bring their best to every single practice. And, I think everyone's just pushing each other right now, and it feels really good. I'm really proud of them and a whole slew of other people I want to mention. You talked about Sam earlier, and Sam, at Monday's practice, Sam lasted a 2-minute press almost by herself. She does such a great job handling ball pressure. Like I said, I give myself a B on rotation. Sam probably should have played more. There were a few people I wanted to play more in that game, and it's just really nice to have so many people you trust to put in a game at any given time. And to be honest, that's not what I was expecting going into a season I knew would have a lot of younger players. So yeah, vibes are good.
Awesome. Yeah. And shout out to your coaching staff. Even what you mentioned about tryouts, it's so hard in the sport to not bring your preconceived notions into a 70-person tryout or whatever Boston had, and, recognize those performances. So shout out to you and your coaches for that.
Yeah, I give a huge credit to Emma for that, because it's really nice having someone who's so unfamiliar with the Boston quadball scene. So plays were happening at tryouts, and Emma's so is this player actually good, or was that just a good play? And it really made myself, Ethan, really think about, have we been underestimating this player because of our preconceived notions of them, and really helped us evaluate kind of everyone from a fresh lens. They've been such an asset to have. They're still trying to figure out which people on the team are married and all that stuff. So they're still playing catch up a little bit, but yeah, they've been incredible.
It's okay. We've all been there. Awesome. Well, Kieran, thank you so much for taking the time tonight. We will see you and the team, I think, just in 12 days, series of the week, New York versus Boston. So we'll look forward to it.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Have a good night.
You too. All right, we're going to switch over to the North Division Series now, where, as we mentioned, Minneapolis got the sweep on Detroit. And, again, referencing, the way we were talking about the series coming in, we all were pretty heavily favoring Minneapolis. And you can look on paper and say, oh, that looks like a pretty comfortable sweep. When you watch the games, especially the first 20 minutes, that's not really what this series was. This was a series of a lot of very even 20 minutes, and then Detroit not having the answers in flag runner on pitch for the force and physicality and athleticism that was Minneapolis. So I think the question is, why was it closer? I think it's a more interesting question than why did Minneapolis win, because I think a lot of us, and we'll talk about it, why it was closer than we expected. So Naresh, what did you see out of that series?
Yeah, I think exactly what you said, where I made sure to finish game 3 of Boston before I tuned into the game 1. I think by that point it was like middle of game 1. And I was like, how is the score 5-4? Like, is it like, what's going on right now? And I think this goes back into the idea of we as media push a certain narrative of what we want teams to do. And then we actually go out there and, because again, at the end of the day, you have to play to actually see who's better. And I think that's where Detroit surpassed expectations for me in terms of their stoutness on defense, their ideas on offense. And I think that for the most part, the first 20 minutes is something you can control and you can coach. And I think that's something that Detroit should hang their heads on. Like that was very good. Post 20 minutes, if you had Neil Peterson, that could be a completely different series. Who knows? So I think the first 20 minutes is the stuff that you can control. And I think they've done, for the most part, a pretty good job at controlling what they can control and go from there. But this overall question that I have for both teams coming out of this weekend is, outside of maybe one or two players on each team, where is your scoring coming from? For Minneapolis, it was Ryan Mejio putting up an absurd 6, 20, and 12 stat line of 6 goals, 20 assists, 12 stops with only 3 turnovers. That's ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous. And to balance that was oftentimes Mejio's assists would go to his Creighton buddy and current teammate in Joe Goulet, with Joe, who finished with 10 goals, 2 assists, and 5 stops. But the reason why I specifically bring that up is because no one else on Minneapolis had more than, no one else had a double-digit scoring effort this past weekend. And I think if your team is so heavily built off of 2 people, I think that's where, when you start playing these Chicago teams, when you show up at champs and you play a Boston who is a bit more diversified, when you play a New York, San Antonio, so on and so forth, that's where I start worrying about Minneapolis. But again, it's one of those things where you see what this team was able to do in USQ. And I know it's not the same team that translates over, but a lot of the core, I think, is. And I think that's where it's just like, you saw how clean Twin Cities was. And now the expectation for a lot of people is Minneapolis is going to hit the ground running. And I think they didn't, and they still did a lot of really good things. And post 20 minutes, I know I said you can't control that, but there's still a way to channel and manipulate the game into doing what you want them to do. And I think Minneapolis did that. They very much controlled post 20 minutes to how they wanted to run. But I that's where it's just like, I believe that their offense needs to be a tad more diversified outside of the Mejio lines. And I think those are the question marks for Minneapolis. For Detroit, it was, is Julian Toyarkov a beater, chaser, seeker? Where are we going with that? And I think if you ask anyone on Detroit, it's probably that, yes, all of the above. But I think there are points where Julian, as a chaser, obviously is so talented that him staying and playing a bit more of that, we talked about it, that star ball carrier role, he is one of the few people on Detroit that I trust to do that. I think Gwen Pratt is another person that I trust to do that. But we're starting to see Gwen Pratt also play a bit more utility minutes. So I think that's where where is scoring coming from for Detroit outside of Julian and Ashton Glenn? And it's just that's what it is, because I think they have a lot of good ideas, but unless it's Julian or Ashton finishing, it wasn't consistent. And I think that was the biggest takeaway for both teams.
Yeah. Obviously this isn't necessarily a new situation for Minneapolis. How many years was so much of Max Meyer and Obanor, being the offense in a lot of ways. And obviously Emma Persons, who this team's without this year, over on Boston now, has been a huge part of their ball carrying lines. So, bringing that talent is a big deal, but you are right. The the output was top heavy. The two you mentioned, along with Max Meyer, were doing a lot of the heavy lifting for this team offensively. But again, part of that is just that whoever was their flag runner on pitch lines was going to do a lot of the heavy lifting in that regard because they weren't scoring a ton, before that period. To that point, and you did touch on this, I think a lot of it does have to be credit to Detroit coming out so well drilled and so just playing to the peak of, I think what they could have been getting out of their players in a lot of ways. Their zones looked very, very good defensively. People were not taking steps out of place. They were making the other team convert perfectly against them. It's very hard to convert perfectly in quadball. I mean, we've talked about it a lot. Usually you're waiting for a defense to make a mistake. Otherwise, you have to execute perfectly. And even on offense, when they were getting those goals, it was well-timed plays, whether it was hammers on side hoops or, those cuts that Lucas Marklin loves to make, to those side hoops. Things are just very well drilled, very well timed for first game of the season, second week of the year. I mean, that's really a shout out to this coaching staff. Obviously, Ryan Sue, the head coach of this team now. But you touched on it. There's just a lack of depth of, top tier talent on this Detroit team. And I think that's going to be the tricky thing. And ultimately, I don't need to see that much more of the Julian Toyarkov beater experience. It's not that they aren't good at the position. I mean, they had a positive plus minus at the position in the series, so credit to them. They just need them in the quadball game. And like you mentioned, they know Neil Peterson for the team this weekend, so Toyarkov was also doing the seeking, and they needed them in the flag runner on pitch game to be a physical player there, and instead it wasn't there. And as someone who's had the game plan against Ryan Mejio in flag runner on pitch, it's like, how many bodies can I throw at this person? And oh wait, that still didn't work. So it's a tough position to be in. Ashton Glenn continues to be up and coming player for this team. So I'm excited to see their growth. But yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely going to need to be, I think a star turn from Toyarkov this year in the quadball game. If this Detroit team is really going to get, and I mean, I think they're going to be a competitive team. They obviously showed they're strategic. I think they're going to beat the bottom half of this North Division, no problem. But I do think it's going to take a lot because I just don't see the offense. We talked about how hard it is to score in quadball, and if the people who can create points for you are just so valuable in the sport, there's not a lot of them. And I think that's what Detroit kind of needs to figure out here.
I agree. I mean, we've talked about the star player aspect of it, but I do think there were enough times that Detroit was able to create scoring just because of their ability to move into space. I think that is a very good trait for a decently young team to have. And I think if they're already doing it this early in the season, I am excited to see what they can do going forward. There was this one play where I think it was Gwen Pratt passed it to the wing. Beater just tried to take them out, and the beater missed, and they were able to take space. And you just see this looping chaser hit a wheel route from the far side small hoop all the way into the medium hoop for the wide open goal because Minneapolis had broken containment at that point. And I think that sort of thing where the fact that you're able to start have these players seeing these cuts, I think that's the important part. For Detroit in particular. And so we'll see how it goes. I think obviously they also came in slightly short rostered. I think they only had 18 players, which I think chalks up to what we saw in game 3, where first series of the year, 18 players, MLQ is a lot more fast paced than everyone always realizes. And I think that's where I think with Detroit, I'm excited to see what they can do because I think they are talented enough and they are fundamentally sound enough that they will beat Toronto, especially if Toronto comes out the way they did 2 weeks ago or a week ago. So I think that's where we will see how Detroit goes. But I think I've seen enough in the half court where I'm excited to see what they can do to build off of these concepts. The one thing that I think Detroit needs to start exploiting more to be able to take advantage of their offensive setup is they need to start making these cuts like the way we talked about Ethan Dillon was doing, these pre-cuts. Anyone that's watched Haikyuu, the volleyball, like start making your run before the ball's even set in the first place. Because because with Detroit, they don't have these quote unquote star players. You might not win all of your one-on-ones. So you need to beat the defenders to the spots so that your speed and momentum carries you to be able to, that gives you that little edge that you need to be able to get the goals that you want. And oftentimes I think in their offensive setup, when they were attacking from angles and sides, Detroit's offense looked very good. When they were in their offensive setup and they were in they would end up in a straight line where they would have one chaser, just almost in a straight line. You could draw a line of best fit with where all the chasers were at, and it would be right there. And that's where I think they kind of got lost, I think, where they didn't have enough momentum, and oftentimes they were flat-footed, which didn't lead them to some of the looks that they were getting. Because I think the overall passing and the ball movement and ideas that they wanted to do, they were there. But the execution is, I think, where they are lacking. And if they can figure that part out, I don't think they need to rely as heavily on Julian going forward. I think they have all of these ideas to get to a point where they can run a line and a half deep of people that just constantly know where to be and they make all the right plays.
Yeah, I mean, they don't need, stars. They just need to be able to execute the fundamentals, like you said. And I think they can go for a long way. And part of that is that their beaters really had a great series, which is the thing we didn't really talk about. I mean, the dodgeball numbers in these stats are, astounding. I mean, they had 2 dodgeballs for the majority of these games. And, credit to the way they were running their defensive sets in a way that was just kind of denying Minneapolis the opportunities to get that back. And we talked about in the other series, it's so hard to play uphill against 2 dodgeballs. And to Minneapolis's credit, like we said that as this is why Charlotte got stomped. But like to Minneapolis's credit, like they still managed to eke out these wins, despite that. And it kind of shows that, what they're doing on the positive side. But yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see because I think this Detroit team, like you said, is already executing at a pretty high level. It's just going to be, where can they get these players to by, mid-season, by these big series that they're going to have to play on the North Division calendar. For Minneapolis, yeah, I mean, this is a team, like you said, that should have come in with high expectations and will now probably be looking forward to that Chicago series. And, it's been a few years since they've been able to get that one. So we'll see how that kind of goes. Any other things you wanted to say before we got to our interview?
No, I mean, obviously we talked a lot about Detroit, but I still want to say the fact that Minneapolis did come in, their game plan initially might not have worked, but they fought through it. They still were making all the right plays, even if they this is what I mean, right? They executed 95% well. And if they had just finished that play, if they had just gotten a half a second faster, I think a lot of good things would have happened and they would have scored a lot more times. But again, first series of the year for Minneapolis, as of right now, I don't know that they're at a point where they can compete against Chicago, but I think they have all the pieces to be able to make it scary if they're able to actually come together. Because at the top end, if you're starting Mejio and Goulet and then you go into Max Meyer, Benzemet, and you go from there, like that's a very, very solid chaser core to start with, and then you go from there. But yeah, I mean, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, and the last thing I just wanted to say is you mentioned Mejio. You mentioned the 20 assists, which would put him on track for absolutely insane numbers, maybe record-breaking numbers in that category. I think the most important stat, though, that you didn't mention was 3 turnovers, because that's always been the thing about Mejio. People have always said, sure, all those stats, but the turnovers. 3 turnovers in a series is really impressive. So with that said, let's bring in our other guest, the head coach of the Minneapolis Monarchs and one of our favorite guests on the show, Cody Nervison. Cody, thanks for coming on.
Oh, geez. Thanks for having me, guys.
So, talk to us about a little bit about this series, because, since you guys became a program, you've had you've taken your licks against Chicago through the years, but you've also beaten Chicago at times. But really, that's largely been it in this North Division. And Detroit gets you last year. Do you guys kind of have this one circle on your calendars coming into the season?
Yeah, definitely. Detroit is always a team, and this is something that we have in mind for ourselves, and it's a warning to any other team that ends up playing Detroit. They're a team that can bite you if you don't take them seriously. We, despite our best efforts in game planning against them last summer, we didn't have it. They had our numbers. Coming out of the gate, I think we were a bit relieved to get them this early, and it forced us to have to choose kind of like what we wanted to get out of this series versus last summer, where we didn't get our first series for a little bit and it was against Chicago. And I think that all that sort of waiting, it kind of, drives you crazy, just like the anticipation, and also like, what do we want to get out of this? Do we want to lean on existing like chemistry and just like try to go for the dubs, versus do we want to like spread the wealth, get reps to everybody, and like invest in something, for that'll be more useful, maybe not right now, but later in the season. And we end up not really committing to either one of those. And I think that just flooded through negatively going into that Detroit series, going into that Super Series weekend. All that is to say, I'm generally pleased with how this last weekend went. I was telling Addie and Nathan in our coaches chat, like, I think there was a lot of ways in which we could have won last weekend, like in as far as like getting actual wins and also getting reps to our depth of the roster. And we were able to spread reps around to most of the 21 that we brought pre-SOP, put them in those like a lot of folks who are unfamiliar with like being in those types of situations, and maybe botching some opportunities here and there. I'm not going to cite any players because I don't want anybody getting mad at me. There's no need for that. But have them make those mistakes, have them get those experiences now, so that further on, going forth into the July and August, the dog days of summer. And now I'm like, Kieran, I forget what you even originally asked, but it was definitely something. It was a series we were looking forward to, and I'm generally pleased with how things went, all things considered.
So I think most people know at this point that obviously the Monarchs have always been, based on a core of like a very small, like almost everyone went to Minnesota, played on the same club team, played on Frost or whatever you guys are calling it that year. But for a while it was like that. And then like also superstar talent from random colleges around the country. Obviously HBB, Goulet would never be playing with you guys all year, but would be around for some of the summers. And then you're finally got to a point where, Goulet was obviously able to play with you guys in club this year, as was Mejio, and then Mejio joined the team as well. So what's been the difference here is, being able to get some of these players and actually being able to work with them as a team, 365 basically.
Yeah, it's bittersweet because it's nice, but somebody like me, somebody like folks who have been with these team cores for so long, we know not to I don't know, we don't want to get too happy because it's somebody might get into some graduate school out of state and then leave us forever. So we try to count our blessings when we can, but I think the thing that feels different this time around, and it's already been invoked with the Ryan Mejio 20 assist count from last weekend, there's an acute awareness of what we need to do to make the entire team successful, and that is getting everybody those not lean on players, but in different ways than we maybe would have in the past, incorporating additional cuts, hockey assists, really spreading the ball and elongating possessions in ways that we haven't previously. There were some times last weekend where we fell into old habits where ball carrier would drive in and try to make the most out of like a 60% look, just because we felt like as a team that's something that we had to do a lot of in previous iterations of Monarchs, Frost, MLQ, whatever the case might be. But that is something that feels entirely different because we have all of these folks together closer to a full calendar year, taking the extra time to institute a plan, a step-by-step process of like what's the best way that we can get everybody involved. So this does truly feel like a system, and so that Mejio can break the single season assist record or whatever he wants to do this summer.
You mentioned systems, and I'm really curious to talk about this. At this point, you are one of, I assume, maybe the longest tenured coach in MLQ, head coach. I'm pulling that off the top of my head, but you have to be up there at this point. My point being, you know, obviously there's tons of film on the specific Monarchs teams that you coach at this point, obviously, years and years and years. And you've got, you know, young players like, you know, you're coaching against Ryan Sue this weekend. We know that the people who come from that Michigan program, they just absorb film. They're watching a ton of film. They're kind of always trying to innovate. That was not an intentional pun. I apologize, everyone. That was
you should own it. Honestly, take it. It's yours.
Yeah. But so, you know, how is it for you to kind of come in, year out, because it's easy to fall on things that have worked for you and say, oh, I'm just going to use these same systems. They worked last year. So what's it for you, and kind of how do you stay, you know, keeping up with the meta games, you know, changing things, you know, as it goes to, you know, keep the Monarchs not being the same team they were 5 years ago?
Yeah, totally. And you know, every year that question does trickle in of, you know, am I the best person for this role? And then I don't know, April trickles around and I'm like, oh, I guess that decision's been made. I don't think I'm an especially great coach, at least when it comes to like the X's and O's of things. And so in previous iterations of this team, I think, I don't know, revisionist history notwithstanding, I think, you know, looking back, we have been able to not coast by, but like any sort of wrinkles in like any like lack of like out of succinct executable game plans from my end, like we've been able to kind of roll past those because we have like an HBB or we have an Emma Persons or something like that. I want to give props to one of our coaches, Nathan Podolsky, who's been really in the fold up here the last couple seasons, really has embraced all sorts of different roles, the game planning, the not just like formalizing strategy, but distilling it to our players. He's better at it than I have ever been and ever will be. So that's been huge for us, in him sort of like, you know, taking that on, owning that piece of it. And then, you know, Addie and myself can kind of slide into the cracks, do a little more like one-to-one coaching, whatever sort of needed in the moment. So like boosting you know, they're both Nathan and Addie's perspectives. Now that Addie's a coach this year, she's obviously been around Monarchs and Frost for several years, you know, and boosting the, you know, the perspectives of folks that maybe don't have those formal coaching roles, but who have been around, you know, inevitably, you know, Terry Carlson will see something that he thinks that, you know, we should leverage. And, you know, he and I think all of us are pretty good about, you know, incorporating all those viewpoints, because as I don't know, as you all know, as people get older, they get a little more restless. They have a lot more opinions, and quadball is no exception. And so, embracing the spilling over of those perspectives, I think, has been one huge change. We're like going forward. That's it's only going to be a positive. You know, the more vantage points, the more you know, experience, you know, perspectives, the better. So I don't know. I'm hugely thankful for those additional voices that have cropped up and have done a lot of things better than I have in the past. And then I'm excited to see how those take shape going forward.
Yeah. Podolsky also, you know, from University of Michigan, like I said, that they do love to crunch the film down there.
Yeah. The second best U of M.
Speaking of the first best U of M, obviously only one college program that really feeds locally, and, you know, a story of a program that went completely unofficial, has come all the way back. Had a big team this year, coached by players who've been involved, obviously, in the Monarchs program as well. Can you talk to us about a couple of those younger players, you know, either still college age, or, you know, coming out in the last year, that you kind of see making a potential difference for this team at times this year?
Yeah, totally. I do want to shout out the folks that all just using last weekend, the folks who got their MLQ debuts as far as like main roster goes. All beaters: Aiden Curley, Matilda Cowan, and Jake Bradich. That's the first time I've said a lot of their last names out loud. So if I got anything wrong, I guess they can yell at me. But all of them are, and I mean this in the best way possible, but they are they're cerebral. They're sponges. They absorb everything. And I'm most excited for them this summer to basically empower them to make use of their because they have great natural instincts. It's just that, the what you see with every college player, especially beaters, where there's that sort of like, that beat before, or not like an actual beat, but like that beat, that moment before the thing that they do, that what they're supposed to do, that hesitation. And I'm looking forward to spending a lot of time just telling them, just like, follow that instinct, make that throw, make that run. Their heads are all in the right spaces, and I was so happy to we ran tight, quick beater rotations last weekend, and I'm glad they all got the chance to see the pitch. But those are three in particular. We love the MNQ folks. We lost some MNQ alumni coming into the season and got a lot of new ones. Those three included for like main roster purposes. So the fact that they were able to take the pitch and make sizable contributions to a 3-0 series win is something that I think one of my favorite successes from last weekend.
Awesome. So looking ahead to the season, obviously I think most people consider Detroit to be one of the maybe top 3 or 4 North Division teams. You put that behind you. Obviously, at some point, you guys are probably going to look at the series that you guys are always looking at. You're not. Yeah, I know you guys will never look by anybody, but I mean that Chicago series is always a series that is premium in this North Division. The last couple of years, it hasn't been as close as it was in the past. Obviously, you guys, as we talked about, reload a little bit. How do you guys kind of feel about where you sit in the North Division, kind of coming into as we continue into the season?
Yeah, I mean, as most of us are Minnesotans, me in particular, a lifelong Minnesotan, I'm cautiously optimistic about pretty much everything and anything, and the Chicago series is no exception. There are some things that I know going into that series will be pretty similar as far as our mindset going into the Detroit series. I know to some extent because it is a precursor to champs, and champs is what's most important. That is ultimately the thing that we're investing in. I expect, some, equitable distribution of, we want to get reps to we want as many folks rather to see the pitch as possible, because that's going to pay dividends down the road. At the same time, we do, believe in the lines that have developed chemistry on the respective teams, whether that's Monarchs or Frost or Creighton or whatever the case might be. And we do believe in our SOP play. That is something that, going into Detroit, regardless of how the first 20 minutes go, whether it's in the chaser and keeper game or the seeker game or both, we believe that we are going to get the edge in at least one, if not both of those arenas. And it's that belief that I think is going to underscore a lot of how we, go into Chicago as well. And I between now and then, thinking about the Cleveland series as well, there are a lot of other sort of permutations of lines that I'm, interested in. I want to see the Creighton, chaser keepers, get more time with like the MNQ beaters and see how they mesh together. I want to see more reps with like a line that's Ryan Cleary at beater and Max Meyer at keeper. I think that could be a lot of fun. So there are a lot of characters that I would like to see share more screen time before, I can't keep the TV motif up, but you know what I'm going for. There, there's a lot of things that I think myself and the other coaches want to play with a little bit before Chicago. But like you said, we're certainly not going to look past anybody.
Awesome. Well, Cody, thank you so much for taking the time tonight. Congratulations on the sweep. That Chicago series we're talking about August 2nd, part of the North Super Series. But yeah, thanks so much for coming on.
Of course. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Awesome. So that will do it for this edition of MLQ Replay. This weekend, 12 Eastern, the Washington Admirals will be taking on the Ottawa Black Bears up in Ottawa. And at 4 p.m., the Chicago Prowl, we were just talking about traveling to Cleveland to take on that upstart Cleveland team that got off to their season start with a bunch of wins, as Naresh was able to chat about last week. Naresh, thanks so much, as always, for coming on. I'll see you again next week. We look forward to seeing everybody next week. Thanks, as always, for tuning in. We hope you enjoy